I've also been researching immigration, and I have the wackos sending me death threats every few weeks. It's really out of control. The situation in America, I mean, we live here in California, in Berkeley. This is like being in a different universe. You go to the South, you go to even parts of the North of America, and you have these extreme groups, where, especially with the economy being where it is, they blame immigrants for their woes. I mean, when the economy is down, it's all the fault of the Mexicans or the Indians or anyone except them. So I've been doing a lot of research on immigration, a lot of writing on it. If we have time, I'll cover some of it to give you a perspective of what goes on in America. So this is why I asked you about the question about YouTube, because these people watch everything I say on the web, and then they send me some nasty notes every now and then. And there are a few websites which declare me to be a traitor and so on and so on. The last immigration conference I spoke at was in Seattle, the Immigration Works Conference. You can realize that the organizers received letters with a bullet attached. There were two keynote speakers, myself and the local senator. The local senator dropped out. And the letter basically says, come at your own peril. This is the biggest gathering of traitors in recent American history. They had the FBI there and so on, and I went anyway. But this is what it's come to in this country when you say the right things about immigration. So anyway, let me get back on topic. So what I was going to do was talk about the work I've done in looking at innovation policy and the myths that I've encountered. My background is that I used to be a tech executive. I founded 2 companies. Then I switched gears and became an academic. I started researching the education systems of India and China. That was my first research project. I'm going to talk about that. Then I started looking at the overall trend of globalization and outsourcing, why companies were going abroad. Then I started looking at the sources of American advantage, because the research I did showed that the US is in serious trouble. If the country is worried about innovation going overseas, then it's time for everyone to lose lots of sleep, because the world has changed. And I'm going to talk about that. I looked into innovation in India and China, and then I started looking into the US advantages, entrepreneurship, immigration, our university research system, and so on and so on. And more recently, I've been looking at innovation in other countries. I spent a lot of time in Hong Kong, in China, India, in Chile, recently in Japan. I was just in the Middle East, in Dubai. I looked a little bit at Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. So I've been looking at it, and as I said, my conclusion from all of that is that they're wasting billions, and none of these efforts will succeed. So what I'm going to do is talk about all this research and talk about these topics, and let this be open. Let's interact and exchange ideas on all of this. First of all, these are some of the myths that I've given this talk a number of times, and these are some of the myths that I've seen out there. Why don't you read through the list? This would seem normal if I didn't have the word myth up there, because everyone talks about how the US is falling behind in graduating engineers and scientists, and how the country is going to lose its competitiveness because it graduates less engineers and scientists than India and China do. Then we have Bill Gates and company talking about the fact that they're going where the skills are. And then we talk about math and science being the key to global competitiveness, and more research, and we need immigration is good, therefore we need more H-1B visas. That's what the business community says, and so on and so on. I'm not going to get into entrepreneurship in this lecture, but I've also done a lot of work on entrepreneurship to challenge some of the myths in that, particularly that the typical Silicon Valley entrepreneur is a young college dropout. That's false. Okay. So let me get into it and discuss some of these topics, and we can stop and go wherever we want to go. First of all, this is a common argument about American education, because when it comes down to education debates in America, the prescription that everyone prescribes, I mean, the common remedy that's proposed is that we fix our K-12 education and graduate more engineers and scientists. Why? Because India and China graduate more engineers and scientists. Okay, I'm back on now. All right, so the common prescription is to fix education and everything will be okay. So what I'm going to show you is the education systems of India and China, which are cited as our biggest competitors. The competitive threat that's believed to be coming from them is based on the education systems. So you have a documentary, for example, called 2 Million Minutes that hypes the heck out of Indian and Chinese education. And the message is, and this is what policymakers have been touting, is that just because India and China teach more math and science to one set of students, America's in trouble. I'm going to show you that the education systems of India and China are pretty lousy and why they're succeeding despite that. Okay. First of all, the common numbers that are cited for graduation rates in India and China are 600,000 from China, 350 from India, and 70,000 from the USA. I did a research project in 2005 in which I had a team of students at Duke, my class over there, research these data. We found was that they were completely wrong. Even President Bush had cited these data. You had politicians, I mean, in Congress, the Senate, if you look through the records, they cite these numbers, that India and China graduate so many engineers, we graduate so many, we're in trouble. So what students figured out was that we weren't comparing apples to apples, that the source of the information was a speech that Ray Bingham, the CEO of Cadence Design Systems, had given in Taiwan in 2002, where he put these numbers up. He basically said these in a speech. And since 2002, the same numbers have been repeated over and over again. You still find them. If you do a Google search on news, I bet you find these exact numbers being quoted a decade later, as if things have stayed constant in those countries. What my students determined was that this was absolute nonsense, that the numbers were inaccurate. That we weren't comparing apples with apples. In effect, what we were doing was we were comparing accredited 4-year engineering degrees, like what you would get here at Berkeley, with what are called short cycles degrees in China and diplomas in computer science and IT in India. Okay. How can you compare the two? It doesn't make sense. And when we did try to do an apples to apples comparison, we found was that in 2004, the US actually graduated more engineers from India if you counted engineering the way the Indians did. Okay. China graduated a huge number of engineers, but that's Chinese propaganda. That the numbers basically are put out by the Communist Party, by the provinces that tell the government what it wants to hear. I mean, the Chinese numbers are high, but they're just manufactured. They counted every, what happens when the government tells, especially in a communist country, if the government tells the province that we want more engineers, provinces will just relabel other degrees to engineering and start putting people in classes and call them engineers. So that's what the Chinese numbers were. Indeed, if you look at Chinese hiring over the last 5 years or so, the vast majority of the output of its engineering colleges did not become engineers. They're basically unemployed or working on factory floors. That's how bad it has been in China because of the big thrust they put into engineering.
How many of the graduates from the US were students from abroad?
Can you hold that for about 4 minutes?
Okay.
I'll get to that. All right, so when we did this research project, I was stunned that my first project in academia ended up reaching the White House. Indeed, President Bush invited my dean at Duke over to the State of the Union address in 2006, and 4 of the president's advisors were talking about Professor Wadhwa's research, as if it was groundbreaking. And I just had a bunch of kids, in my class doing some research, and we published a paper. So that's when we knew that the US is in real trouble, that we're basing national policy on myths. I was able to take on all the research that the CIA, the National Science Foundation, National Academy of Sciences, all these wonderful groups are doing, and shatter all of their myths by simply getting a bunch of kids to make some phone calls and question the numbers. Okay. So my second research project was to figure out why companies are going abroad. I mean, and what the way the trend was. If indeed the education systems of India and China were so bad, then why were American companies going to India and China? And a great question. And then the question was, okay, why do India and China graduate all these 2-year degrees if they don't matter? It's not that Indian parents are stupid. They won't spend their life savings on educating their children when the degrees are irrelevant. Right? People put their life savings into education over there. Well, why is this happening? And where is this headed? What's the long-term trend? I had done a 1-year snapshot in 1 semester. So next semester we decided to do to now get to the root of outsourcing. We actually surveyed about 60 companies, about 80 division representatives, of companies that Lou Dobbs, if you remember him, used to say were outsourcing America. We did a systematic study to understand why companies were going abroad. And here's what we learned. That when we asked these executives about the United States, we asked about their hiring practices. We looked at acceptance rates, sign-up bonuses, time to fill a position. There was no indication of a shortage. There's no shortage of there has been no shortage of engineers, at the high level in America. So this is absolute nonsense. Now, my conclusion about Silicon Valley has changed recently because indeed you have a shortage of skilled talent in Silicon Valley, but that's a different discussion we can have. But this whole issue about shortage of engineers, it's bogus. There's no shortage of engineers. When we asked companies where the shortages were, I was surprised that they said the shortages were in China, not in India. Because this doesn't make sense. Because if you think about it, when China is graduating these zillions of engineers and India is graduating less than the United States, why did companies tell us that they could hire all the people they wanted to in India? This was a big puzzle when we saw these data. We asked them to compare the skills of Indians and Chinese versus Americans, and guess what? Americans are better in terms of the quality of work they do, the productivity, their market knowledge, their knowledge of English. But the Indians and Chinese are cheaper and they work harder. Not a surprise here. If you're in a third world country, you work very hard. You have to. That's the way life is. But this created so much controversy when I published this report. Question?
So what is the demographic of the U.S. workers that are Indian and Chinese?
I'm going to get to that as well. Okay. That's about 20 minutes from now. You're reading my mind. All right, then we asked these companies about bachelor's degrees. With all this fuss about bachelor's degrees in the United States, do they even matter? And guess what? Nearly half the companies said they didn't care about degrees. That if they came across experienced talent, they would hire anyone that could do the job. They did not care about degrees. So the national policy debate, which hinges on degrees, is questionable. The degrees don't matter, then why bother? Why are companies going abroad? It's all about cost savings. And then we asked what the trend was, and the vast majority of them said that outsourcing will continue and gain momentum, and what's more, they're going to be shifting advanced R&D over to India and China. So when I published this report, it really, I was a superstar on Lou Dobbs and CNN. They would have me on practically every day and hype the heck out of what I was saying because that's what I had learned. I was basically fueling the fears of outsourcing and everything going overseas because that's what all the information I had showed. Then the question was, okay, if all these high-level jobs are going abroad, then do degrees begin to matter? Good question. I mean, because R&D jobs are different than regular IT-level engineering jobs, right? When you're doing R&D, you're doing innovation. For innovation, you need to have a good base of education. You can't just be a college dropout and know how to do scientific research or even how to take your ideas and turn them into reality. You need to have education for that. So then the question was, okay, do these new jobs require special degrees and special skills? So we did another project. And first we looked at the long-term trend in bachelor's degrees. We found was that China, even though the numbers are bogus, they're bogus going upwards. In other words, they may be exaggerating them, but the Chinese numbers are very impressive. They really have been focusing national priority on increasing graduation rates of engineers. The US has been more or less stagnant. India is in pathetic shape. And look at the trend for India. This is, for a country that builds itself as an IT superpower, where outsourcing has been increasing enormously, the Indian engineering graduation rates were pathetic. Masters, even more depressing for India. China, basically, look at this trend. China graduates more masters in engineering than does the US right now, than does India. I mean, India has 2 degrees. The regular engineering tech, this is the one that counts, and this is a bogus degree called the MCA. It's really for arts graduates who want to work for companies like Infosys or want to work for the multinationals and write computer code. So the Indian numbers are very impressive. Question?
Does this take into account that most of the Indian students go abroad for their masters?
No, most don't. Very few do. I mean, if you look at the percentages, you're talking about probably 50,000 or so a year, which is a small number, and most of them have not been returning. The return rates for Indians have been very, very low. We'll talk about that also. PhDs. I mean, look at these data. India graduates less than 1,000 PhDs in engineering a year. Shameful, pathetic. Okay, not even enough to staff its growing universities. China is taking over the world. So if you go by the common beliefs, and this is what I also believed, what should be happening is that China should now be the innovation power of the world. Okay, it should be innovating. It should be doing advanced R&D. It should be leading the world in scientific research, according to this data. India should be falling off a map. India should basically, its industry should be imploding. It should be in self-destruct mode. And I actually said these things to the Indian press a few years ago, and I became a national villain because this is exactly what they didn't want to hear. I took on the group called NASSCOM, which is India's IT industry. I took on the Indian government because what was happening in India was that Indian politicians were reading all this press coming from the United States about India's great advantage in engineering education. And what do politicians do when they see the golden goose? They try to steal the eggs or they try to steal the goose, right? So they started playing games with the education system, talking about quotas and slicing and dicing it way and allocating it according to caste and God knows what else. Basically, they were playing games rather than trying to fix a basic system which was totally corrupt and awful. They started playing games trying to steal as much as they could from it. And I took them on, basically. I started making and now, then they changed. I mean, NASSCOM backed off and they revised their numbers. They had the 350,000 number on their website as well. NASSCOM backed off, they changed it. They started admitting that their education system is in big trouble. And there's been a major shift in India over the last 3 or 4 years about improving its education system. Rather than boasting about it, they're now ashamed about it, which is what they should be. Okay. But this is what I had learned. So according to this data, India should be imploding. Now I'm going to discuss, my views changed dramatically after doing more research. Now your question about the foreign graduates, here's the answer. 60% of the PhDs in engineering in the United States are foreign nationals, as are 43% of the masters. Okay. Now I've got nothing against foreign nationals, but as you'll see if we have time for that discussion, the problem for the United States is when they start leaving and becoming our competitors. And that's what's happening right now. All right, so this is my first 2 years of research, and then I started going to India and looking in depth at what was happening. I spent a lot of time in China to see what was happening over there, and I was basically to eat my words. Here's what we learned. That India, in every industry we looked at, is becoming a major R&D hub. This is mind-blowing. We looked in pharmaceuticals. It's developing the most sophisticated types of drugs right now. They're doing high-level drug discovery. They're developing new, for example, heart patients take 4 medications commonly. And the medications cost thousands of dollars in the United States, maybe tens of thousands of dollars for some people, depending on how much they get ripped off by the drug companies, right? But that's normal. Everyone takes that. Dr. Reddy's in India is rolling out, I think this year, a pill called the poly pill, which combines 4 medications into one. Guess what the cost of it is? $30 per patient per year. I'm not talking about per day, per month. I'm talking about per year. They'll probably price it at $300 in the United States. But the fact that they could combine these medications into one pill and price it so low is really innovative. It's happening in India. I published a detailed paper on the pharma industry in India in which we looked at company by company what was going on. It blows your socks off to see that these things are happening in India. In aerospace, you would expect the software for the airlines to be developed in India because of its strength in IT. But the first-class cabins of the jetliners are the most important component from a revenue perspective. That's what the companies care about, is revenue. You go to TCS, Tata Computer Consulting in Pune, you'll see that they have these chambers where they're designing first-class cabins. So is HCL. Top Indian companies are doing the most advanced work in the aerospace industry for American, Canadian, for global multinationals. Consumer appliances. The vast majority of Indians, probably 99% of them, have never used a washer or dryer. Okay. Yet GE, Whirlpool, all the major manufacturers are developing the next generations of white goods in India right now. I mean, I was blown away when I went to some of these labs. They actually have washers and dryers on the floor there, which people have to use because they have never used them before. But they're designing the next generations of the products for these companies. I mean, if you look at semiconductors, I mean, for example, the Amazon Kindle, guess where it was designed? It's built in China. Guess where it's designed? In New Delhi. Has anyone ever told you about that before? No, because Amazon won't talk about it. I mean, why? Because they'll get thrashed for outsourcing. But the circuitry for that is built in India. The Palm Pre, one of the nicest touchscreens out there, designed in New Delhi. If you go to, the semiconductor industry in India is booming. They're doing the most sophisticated design for the circuitry, not only for American companies and European companies, but also for the Japanese. The Japanese are outsourcing high-level R&D to India. So this doesn't make sense, right? If you have such a poor education system, the country's infrastructure is crumbling, for it to be rising so rapidly in R&D. So getting to the topic, to the topic of this class, innovation. How do you take people with bad education and turn them into innovators? Isn't that a mystery? So, but this also challenges all the myths out there about what it takes to innovate. What they teach you, I don't know what they've taught you, what my friend here has taught you. What they teach you is all about education and process and investing in R&D and this method and that method to do innovation. False. India is innovating despite itself, despite all the odds, despite all the obstacles. Right? So there's some interesting lessons in India's success. Now let's go to China. I mean, China, what they've achieved within one generation is nothing less than amazing. Within one generation, they've gone from being a poor, failing state to now being, a world, having world-class infrastructure. You go to the big cities there, it's a modern version of Europe. It's just amazing to see what the Chinese have achieved. Gleaming skyscrapers, modern highways. Like I said, you have to admire the Chinese for what they've achieved. Just nothing less than amazing. Now, they're also spending massively on R&D. The types of subsidies that they provide universities, I mean, you go to some of the university labs over there, they make Berkeley look like a third world country. They're so advanced, so modern. And they throw money at the problem like there's no tomorrow. However, there's almost no innovation coming out of the Chinese labs. The vast majority of the papers that they publish a lot of papers, but nearly all of them, probably 99% of them, are irrelevant or pirated. They're just useless. That's because, and they file a lot of patents, but I'd be hard-pressed to name more than, I'll bet you if you went through the thousands of patents they published, you'd probably find less than 10 or 20 that are really relevant. It's all irrelevant stuff. You can patent anything. You can patent any silly little object. That's because the government has been incenting people, incenting researchers to file patents. And what happens if you get a million yuan as a prize for filing a patent or getting a publication? You'll do whatever it takes, right? But that's what's been wrong with China. Now, my views about China have changed most recently also. I went there recently. In fact, I taught a class at Tsinghua about 3 weeks ago, and then I met local entrepreneurs there. There's a new part of China that's emerging very rapidly. The youth, basically, it's the kids out of school who are as open-minded, as aggressive, as ambitious as the kids here in Berkeley are, as the kids in Stanford are. And they're the ones who are beginning to innovate. The companies that they're forming are world-class companies. They're learning rapidly from their friends in America, and they're building great companies. So moving forward, the innovation in China isn't going to come from the government, because governments can't innovate. No matter how much what the Chinese show you is that no matter how much you spend, you can't buy innovation.
Do you have statistics to show whether the U.S., China, or India has useful patents, like percentage-wise?
I'm not a fan of patents. In fact, my view on patents is that they discourage innovation. Basically, they are an inhibitor to innovation versus a measure of innovation. Okay. But one way of looking at it is when private companies file patents, what I did was because I looked at the US patent system and realized that 99% of it is garbage as well, right? Irrelevant. But if you go to the WIPO database, the World Intellectual Property Organization database, that's where companies file patents to begin the process of protecting themselves globally. If private industry filed a patent, they probably have something valuable to protect. So we looked at the WIPO database and we were blown away by the high percentage of Indian Indian founders filing patents in that. Because India gets thrashed for not filing any patents. But if you look at WIPO patents filed by American companies with Indian authors, the numbers are surprisingly high. And that was an indication of what's happening out of India. That you won't find very many American companies with Chinese authors based in China doing it. You'll find Chinese in America contribute to about 13% of the patents. Despite the fact that Chinese only 0.6 or 0.7% of the US population, they contribute to 14% of America's patents. So Chinese in America can become like Americans and they can innovate. Chinese in China are a hopeless cause because of government. It's all top-down, government mandated. It's all a game. The government offers huge incentives to file patents, and people file stupid patents. So again, the Chinese government can learn a lot by looking at why the people here have succeeded.
You can say the same thing about Indians too, right? Indians prosper much better here than Indians.
I'm going to talk about that in 7 minutes from now. All right, now, how did India succeed? I'll talk until 1:30, and then we'll do Q&A for 15 minutes.
Very good, thank you.
All right, now how did India succeed? Like I said, this was haunting me for a long time. So I spent several months in India trying to get to the bottom of this because I had declared India dead. India's IT industry had flashed in the pan, and yet I was now finding all these new data and publishing papers which showed India as a superpower in R&D. And I became extremely popular in India after I started saying that. I became a national hero. Even now when I go to India, I was just there 2 weeks ago at the NASSCOM conference. I was like being a rock star. I was on the front page of local newspapers. I mean, people lined up to meet me because I was saying all these great things about India, which is okay. I mean, I like that status. But how did India achieve its magic? Okay, how can you take the output of such a weak education system and turn people into innovators? What we found basically was that just like Indian industry finds its way around every problem that the society or that government imposes on it, it builds its own infrastructure. It built its own education system. That's before I lose power here. Basically, the same way that the Japanese learned the best practices of American manufacturing in the 60s and the 70s, they perfected it. And they went from being a third world country to being a manufacturing superpower. The Indians learned the art of educating people, of manufacturing skills. And here's how they did it. I'm going to get into, I'll do a few slides on this. First of all, take workforce recruitment. When you folks are ready to look for your next job, what are you going to do? You're going to put together a resume. Okay? You're going to spend a lot of time putting together a good resume. What does a resume tell you about a person? It tells you how good they are at putting together a good resume, or how good their friends are at helping them put together a good resume, or how good mom and dad are at looking for errors. It doesn't tell you how innovative or creative or competent the person is. Well, Indians are very good at fudging resumes, and Indian companies figure that out. So if you're looking for a job with an Indian company, they'll take your resume as a placeholder, but they don't look at the resume. They interview you. They put you through batches of psychometric tests. They perfected the art of interviewing people based on actual skill versus, based on competence versus skill. New employee training. When you join Infosys, for example, they take you to Mysore. They have a beautiful campus there. Puts Berkeley to shame. You basically study 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, and they retrain you in everything you should have learned in school. They basically put you through intense master's level courses that reprogram you. And that's when the training starts. In American industry, when you join a company, that's when basically you expected to have all the skills you need. You expected the university would have taught you everything, and that's it. That's the last training you get. You can go and do some online courses, perhaps by yourself, and your boss will frown at you if you do it during company hours. In leading Indian companies, formal training is mandatory. In some companies, they give you mandatory 1 to 3 weeks of training. Every employee every year must get that level of formal training. And that doesn't count all the informal training and the managerial development techniques that they have. Basically, these companies are masters at the art of educating their employees. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. If you look at the results of it, India's supposed to have very high turnover. Indian IT industry. Indian IT industry's turnover rates are the lowest in the world in the industries in which they are, and they've been declining despite the fact they've been averaging 30 to 45% growth rates. Attrition rates have been dropping. The profitability has been increasing. How did this happen? Because what happened was that they realized that people don't leave companies just for money. That's a myth that people leave companies for money. they leave companies to get better skills. They want to improve themselves. So if the company invests in its people and improves their skills, it makes them more valuable. So it can afford to pay them more money. And in the case of Indian industry, if they become more valuable, they can charge more money for them. They become more productive. They can raise billing rates. Therefore, their profits go up. So this is the secret of India's success. The private industry decided to take the law into its own hands and start re-educating its people. And it goes through continuous innovation, continuous skill upgrading process and teaching people how to do all this. So getting back to open innovation, well, if America wants to make its workforce more productive, it needs to start investing in its people. It needs to start teaching them new skills, not just the things that are needed for their job, but outside their job, and constantly challenging people to do more. Okay, you can just read through some of the slides. I'm going to jump directly into immigration, and then I'll stop there for Q&A. The university research system is totally screwed up. I mean, just scan through the slides over here. We put in about $50 billion a year into university research and get squat out of it. I mean, less than $2 billion in value if you measure it in terms of license revenue. So the system is busted in America. This is a problem that many countries have tried replicating and have said, do anything but copy the American system. Let's do a very quick review of the state immigration system in America. This is based on 5 research projects in which we surveyed people, we analyzed patent data, a very extensive set of research projects that this is based on. Here's what we learned. That first of all, during the biggest days of economic growth in recent American history, going back to the dot-com days, 52% of the startups in Silicon Valley were founded by immigrants, people born abroad. 52%, think about it. Here, this is a Top Gun school for techies. I mean, in other words, it's more difficult to survive here in industry or in startups than anywhere else in the world. Yet more than half of the businesses started here by immigrants, foreign-born. Nationwide, a quarter of all the companies started are foreign-born. I was talking about the fire I take from the anti-immigrant groups. They talk about immigrants taking their jobs away. If you added up all of the green cards that were issued to foreigners from 1995 to 2000, take a 10-year period, it's less than the number of jobs created by the companies that immigrants founded. It's probably half as much. Okay. Now, my Indian friends were hyperactive in starting companies. They started more companies than the next 4 groups from the UK, Japan, China, and Taiwan combined. Now, this is also some very interesting data. Actually, 17% of the patents filed in the United States in the WIPO database had Chinese name authors, 17%. And 14% had Indian name authors in 2006. We found was that this increased by about 337% over a 7-year period. The dramatic increases, and I was trying to figure out why did the patents increase, and I'll show you that after 2 slides. First of all, this shows you why these immigrants have an advantage. That it's not that Indians and Chinese are smarter. The Indians and Chinese that have been coming here tend to be better educated than the people that are left behind. The vast majority of them have bachelor's degrees. 3/4 have PhDs or masters. And 3/4 of those PhDs or masters are in STEM-related fields. Right? Here's what the problem is. That right now in the United States, there are over 1 million skilled immigrants and their families waiting for green cards. We keep talking about the 12 million illegals that jumped over the fence. There are 1 million that came here legally, that are working for American companies, contributing to American competitiveness, filing patents, and there are no visas for them. In the EB1, EB2, EB3 categories for which they qualify, there are only 120,000 visas available per year, with a 7% per country cap. In other words, if you're an Indian or a Chinese or a Russian or a Mexican or anyone from a high population country, you have the same quota as Iceland, as Finland, as Morocco, all these small population, I don't know about Morocco, but all these small population countries. And the result is that the graduates of my students at Duke who graduate from the master's programs, you folks who might be foreign nationals in this audience, you can't get green cards anymore. If you start the process, it could take you 20 or 30 years to get a green card. The result is that they're streaming back home in record numbers. Now, most recently, I've been looking at entrepreneurship in India and China. It's booming like never before. In the last 5 years, I've seen such a dramatic shift in both countries that just this event I went to in NASCOM, they started what's called the Product Enclave about 3 or 4 years ago. They would have 50 people, 100 people. The last event had 1,200 entrepreneurs coming to it, all in the last 4 or 5 years. You go to China, booming. I mean, you see thousands of startups in every city. And large numbers of those startups are returnees from the United States. You just have to go and start meeting these people. You realize that the top executives of these companies were educated at Berkeley, at Stanford, at Yale, all over America. They come from the top universities in America, and they decided to go back home. It used to be that students would stay here. I'll show you some data on students. We surveyed returnees to ask why they came and why they left. They came here for economic opportunity. We asked them why they went back. They went back because they thought they'd have better career opportunities back in their home countries. And we asked them how they're doing back home. They were doing far better back home than they were doing in the United States. So I've done extensive research on this problem. They're doing better professionally. They're doing better, living a better quality of life, and so on and so on. Returnees to India and China tend to be very young, which is bad for America because just when they're at the prime of their careers, they're going back home right now. And they're doing much better when they go back home. Foreign students, this is another question that was asked here about Indians and Chinese returning home and so on. It used to be that the National Science Foundation has been keeping track of PhD returnees. It used to be that 93% of Chinese and 85% of Indians stayed here for 5 years at a time. They kept researching them. In other words, they stayed here forever. Okay. So you're talking about nearly all of them. We did a survey of 2,000 students studying at American colleges. And when we asked the Indians what their long-term intent was, only 6% of the Indians said they want to stay permanently. 10% of the Chinese said they want to stay permanently. 15% of the Europeans want to stay permanently. The rest plan to be here for a short period of time, typically 1 to 5 years, and they were headed back home. It used to be that when students came here to America, the norm was that they would stay here, even though they told their parents that they would only go for 3 or 4 years and then they'd come back. The fact is that they would end up staying in America permanently. This was the norm. Now when you talk talk to your peers here, go around and talk to Indian and Chinese students on campus, and you ask them what their plans are, they look at you strange. I mean, what do you mean, what are your plans? Of course we're going home. That's the norm now. Their friends have gone back home. Their friends are doing much better back home. The economy is booming back home. So America is losing out because of its really stupid immigration policies. Okay, I'm going to stop here on the slides. I'm going to talk a little bit about my work in other geographies. Question, Rahul?
Did you do any studies on how many U.S. students leave after they get a degree to work abroad?
There's no formal study on that. You just have to go and speak to the HR directors in India and China. They're flooded with resumes from Americans who want to now work in India. I don't think anyone has hard numbers because when you go abroad, you don't have to get permission from the government. So there's no way of really tracking it like that, okay? But you look at applications to Indian universities, they don't want Americans anymore. Before it used to be that they want some white faces on campus so they looked good. Now they don't care.
So yeah. There's no barriers to entry for students who want to work in other countries?
There are lots of barriers. They don't necessarily want Americans unless they can charge them high fees. But the point is that it's not a novelty anymore. Now the norm is that Americans look for jobs abroad. If you talk to the Indian IT companies, they'll tell you that they're flooded with requests from Americans to get jobs over there in India because that's where they see the future being brighter. That's just the beginning of the trend, because it's only now that those countries are doing really well and the standard of living is quite high for people who go from here to there. All right, I started looking into innovation experiments in a number of countries. For example, Russia. Russia announced what was called Skolkovo, which is a science park in Moscow, just outside Moscow. What countries believe is what they read in Michael Porter's books. How many of you read Michael Porter's Cluster Theory? Okay. Just a few of you, fortunately, because it's bogus. It's completely wrong. In fact, so much so that almost every geography in the world believes it. What they believe is that if you if you put a science park next to a university, and if you now incent companies within the industries that you pick to move there, you'll get innovation. Because what Porter discovered was that there are clusters of economic activity, and they tend to be around universities. Like, here, you have 2 great universities. In fact, you have a bunch of great universities, and technology is clustered over here. So he looked at that, and he said, therefore, if you have a university and a science park next to it, you'll get magic. Well, there have been hundreds of those created worldwide. Okay, maybe a couple of thousand were created worldwide. Every single one has failed. Okay. I mean, when you ask academics to give you, proof of cluster theory, they talk about Research Triangle Park, and they talk about Silicon Valley. But Research Triangle Park is a 50-year-old thing which happened to work for other reasons. Silicon Valley, do you see any government offices over here? Do you see any government bureaucrats trying to give funding to startups or teaching entrepreneurship? Nothing to do with government. You can't give the government credit for Silicon Valley. In fact, Silicon Valley is opposed to government. The last thing that they want is more government intervention. We don't want handouts. We don't want any support from government over here. But that's the mindset there. So Russia basically did this thing. I was in Okinawa recently. Okinawa funded a magnificent university called the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology. They gave them huge land next to the beach, beautiful university. They hired a top academic from Stanford to come and run it. Then when I went there, I said, okay, tell me, so they're building the university now. They're building some magnificent buildings all around it. They're building their cluster there. So I said, show me, how many engineers do you graduate? No, I mean, this was a government-sponsored event, and we had all the government bureaucrats over there, with the who's who of Okinawa and the Japan that was at this event that I was invited to. They scrambled to get me the data. And when we looked at it, there were only 2,000 graduates in engineering per year from all of the universities in Okinawa. And the vast majority of those graduates don't find work locally, so they leave the island. So there's a zero bench to draw from. And then I asked them, okay, how are you going to get companies to move over here? How are you going to manage all this thing? They have like 135 people that they're hiring who are going to decide what research gets commercialized from the university. It's built, the entire research system is built on the US model. And then they're going to basically tell local entrepreneurs what companies to start, and they're going to give them some small seed amount of financing to teach them how to do this thing. I think all of you realize that it's pretty brain dead, right? I went to Chile. I looked at their clusters. They had decided to sponsor 4 clusters many, many years ago, and they were now going to become an IT outsourcing hub. And I went and looked at their IT industry. What they achieved within 8 years was impressive. They grew to a multi-$100 million industry. But when you look at the population of Chile is 16 million people. They wanted to be able to take that this industry to be a $5 billion industry within the next 5 years or so. There aren't enough people in Chile to staff this entire cluster that they were trying to build. But it's the same sort of brain-dead prescriptions that they have all over the world. So when I went to Chile, I actually wrote about it. I ripped into them. To their credit, they asked, okay, what will work for us? I spent some time with the entrepreneurs. I looked at the system there. I said, first of all, your local entrepreneurs are not going to be able to become tech entrepreneurs because they're afraid of taking risk. It's a cultural no-no in Chile and Japan and most countries in the world to fail. If you fail, you're toast. Okay? So I said, first of all, your local entrepreneurs are not going to be able to change their culture within a generation. Secondly, you don't have the talent here. Thirdly, they want to build products for global markets. Your 16 million people isn't enough to build a tech industry around. So they have to build for global markets, except they have no idea how global markets work. They don't understand anything about anything outside Chile. So they said, okay, what will work? I said, the only hope you have is to import the talent. So what I advised them to do was, instead of spending a few $100 million on these brain-dead clusters, to import entrepreneurs. So about 4 months ago, they launched a program called Startup Chile. Startup Chile will give anyone, anywhere in the world, that they think is serious, $40,000 just to come and live in Santiago or anywhere in Chile. No strings attached. If you're starting a company and they think the company is legit, you go there and hang out there, they give you $40,000. The second part of the program, which I'm actually going there next week, the week after next, is that they also have another program for the outsourcing industry. If you hire locals, then they'll subsidize the first year of salary. I told them to make it available to these entrepreneurs, so that what should happen is that these entrepreneurs are going there should be able to hire local talent for practically nothing. Okay. And then they're going to be setting up the networks, the social networks around these entrepreneurs. Now, they've already recruited 25 entrepreneurs. This is a pilot program. The 25 entrepreneurs cost them $1 million. Think about it. Okay, they want to take it to 1,000. So the 1,000 will cost them what, $40 million. Now, out of 1,000 startups coming to Chile, my prediction is that at least half of them will fall in love with it, because it's like California in reverse. It's beautiful. You can rent an apartment in Vina del Mar, which is like Miami Beach on steroids, for $400 a month, 2-bedroom apartment there. The government gives you, free money to come and hang out there. Who wouldn't want to do that, right? And once they start interacting with the local entrepreneurs, they'll start teaching them the skills that are necessary. Most of the people that go there, not most, at least half of the people who go there will want to stay there 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, and a large proportion of them will become permanent residents and continue on in Chile. But in the meantime, out of the 1,000 that have gone there, the same odds will apply as apply in Silicon Valley, that 9 out of 10 of these companies will go out of business. They'll fail. But you know something, if you have 100 world-class companies coming out of nowhere in Chile, that's huge. It'll change the entire region. And out of those 100, you might have a handful of Google-class companies. So for $40 million, Chile is going to do what regions have spent billions of dollars on trying to do, build something out of nothing at all. But that's sort of creative thinking that you need. It's all about people. My research into Silicon Valley has shown that Silicon Valley is just one giant network. What makes people innovate is an interaction with each other. Risk-taking is a must. The ability to think outside the box is a must. Challenging authority is a must, this is why China is not innovating, because you can't take on the government there. You can't take them on economically, you can't take them on spiritually. Otherwise, you're dead meat. So you need to be able to challenge not only your government, but challenge the norms, the myths, and speak up, and then it's the interaction between people that makes all the magic. That's where innovation comes from. And that's the experiment that Chile is trying. And we'll know within the next 2 years or so whether it succeeds or not. I'll bet you money that it does. Let's do Q&A for the next 15 minutes.
So what Chile is doing, isn't it similar to what they've done in the United States in terms of like the enterprise zones, where they did give employment incentives for people to hire locally in those firms, and that for the most part has been?
I don't know which region has done that actually. The US really hasn't had government-sponsored programs to lure entrepreneurs. Normally when you have these clusters being formed by governments, they'll give money to big businesses, and mostly it's based on who lobbies the most and who gives the biggest kickbacks to the corrupt politicians. Even in America, it's the same system as anywhere else in the world, because when you give bureaucrats money, they'll find a way to take as much of it for themselves as they can. And it's not always based, and government bureaucrats don't understand what does and doesn't work. Okay, they're typically totally out of touch with it. The entrepreneurs know more about markets and what's needed by customers than government bureaucrats do. So who are they to pick entrepreneurs that tell people what to develop or offer incentives? It doesn't work. The Chile experiment basically is they're not going to pick industries. They're just going to pick people who are serious about. You have to weed out people, because anyone, if you want to go and spend, if someone gives you $40,000 to hang out in Vina del Mar, you'd do it, but you may not build a company. So they have to basically make sure that people coming there are actually building companies, and select the entrepreneur versus pick the industry.
So do they have to come in with a business plan? Like what are the metrics?
They have to present their business plan over Skype, and be very persuasive that they're serious and they're going to build a business there. That's all it takes. So Rahul, you may want to go to Chile if you know. You did? Question?
Yeah, it's kind of more of a comment. Just I was in Colombia. I'm from Colombia, South America. Population of maybe close to 40 million, and I was in Medellin, which used to be
the drug capital of.
Dangerous places in the world. I
Well.
recommend you go to Colombia. It's very safe. But it was the same experience, you know, as you have in Chile. There's a lot of smart people down there. They're not afraid to compete. They have a lot of good ideas. And one thing that I'm noticing, and we're doing more work in Latin America, is the investor community is slowly emerging, right? So there's a lot of angels, a lot of people are trying to figure out how do I put some of my wealth into an entrepreneurial environment. So it's another great example of what you're talking about, which is
Absolutely.
there's a great.
But they need to bring, because they won't be able to develop the skills for entrepreneurship, I mean for tech entrepreneurship on their own. You need to import the talent. Because no matter what they do, they might be determined and smart and so on. They just don't know what sells and how to build a company, you know, Silicon Valley style. So you've got to bring in a few hundred of people from here to teach them the ropes. Question?
So if Chile's plan actually does work and other countries actually implement that idea into their country, do you think that idea would actually, you know, it would actually scale to other countries?
Okay, good question. For example, the Russians asked me, can we do a program like Chile? I said, if you gave me $500,000 to come and hang out in Siberia for 6 months, I wouldn't do it, right? Because what's that?
Mexico, for example.
Mexico, yeah, if you had a safe part of Mexico, the problem is people are fearful of going to Colombia. They're fearful of going to Mexico because of drug violence and corrupt governments and so on. The advantage Chile has is it has none of those. It's one of the least corrupt countries in the world. It's open to immigration and so on and so on. So they have a lot of advantages which work for them. This is why I recommended this to them. Each country has to have different, you can't, you know, there's no single recipe for innovation. You have to go and, for example, yesterday I had breakfast with a major investor from Brazil. He was asking me, you know, my advice for Brazil. I said, I'm not going to give you advice because I haven't been there, I haven't seen it. There's so many different factors over here. They think that it's cookie cutter, that, you know, before it used to be cluster theory, now immigration, it's not black and white. Each region has their own strengths. You have to go and understand what that is and then do it based on the local economy and on the local needs. Question?
You mentioned, I mean, clusters do not make sense, as you said. Is it more, but I mean, what would be the advantage of a cluster? You said that it's not the agglomeration, not putting companies together, but it's more the social network, right?
Yeah, clusters happen. Okay, clusters can't be artificially created. That's the thing. But when you know, the Silicon Valley's magic is because of its, you know, because I was researching why have Indians been so successful. 30 years ago, if you looked around South Bay, you wouldn't find any Indian CEOs. Maybe, you know, a handful of them out of the whole region. Today, 1 out of every 8 startups in Silicon Valley is an Indian CEO or an Indian CTO. Okay, how do you go from, you know, to and Indians constitute 6% of the working population in Silicon Valley. So how do 6% of people who have weird accents, who look and, you know, sound strange, who have no idea about American markets, who come out of a shitty education system, come over here and take on, you know, the brightest of the, you know, the top guns from the world? Okay. The answer, because this is what I've been researching, it's what I've been doing for the last 18 months, is the answer is that the networks that they built. What they realized was that, you know, Indians are one thing are very creative and resourceful. They came here, they figured out what works, and they realized that Silicon Valley is one giant network. It's all about the interaction, people to people. So the first, you know, wave of people who had achieved success said, okay, we've now made our millions. It's time to give back. We're going to start mentoring those behind us. So they formed a group called the Indus Entrepreneurs, TIE. And TIE is no longer, you know, important, but during its heydays, it was a driving force behind Indian entrepreneurship. It was just one giant network. That Indians started helping other Indians. They started mentoring. They started providing seed financing. They started, you know, coaching each other and so on and so on. And they lifted each other so much so that they achieved so much success here that it had an impact on India. The Indian government and, you know, Indians started saying that, hey, look, if these people can be, if our people can become so successful there, why can't we be successful over here? This does, right.
Could then be a solution that you teach people how to build social networks and how to build the networks like the Indians do, and more to put companies together and just think that it will be good?
Yeah. The answer, yes. You don't teach people, you basically build the social networks. Like with Chile, I'm going to encourage them to build the social networks. First of all, I said locate everyone within a few blocks of each other. Secondly, host events every Friday night. Thirdly, bring successful entrepreneurs from here. I said, you know, offer them 3 months sabbatical. The government will pay, any successful entrepreneur here that wants to come and mentor over there. You can come there for 1 month, for 3 months. They'll put you up in a nice resort. All you have to do is come in and help the local entrepreneurs. Spend 4 hours a day mentoring entrepreneurs and enjoy the rest of the time on vacation with your family. Something like that, something radical like that. So you can build the networks, but they have to build momentum on their own. You have to have people behind them which make them succeed. So.
Vivek, can you talk to us a little bit about how we can put America back together and what America has to do in order to kind of stop this brain drain and exporting GDP to other countries?
Well, first of all, there are multiple things that the country needs to do. On the immigration front, the simple fix is to expand the number of green cards available. There's a million people that are here. Give them, they're already here legally. They're already in line for green cards. Anyone who buys a house for more than $250,000 can get a green card immediately. You probably sell 200,000 or 300,000 houses, and imagine how much of a boost that would be to the economy. With all these foreclosures, you would immediately stem the foreclosure problem in America, and now boost the real estate industry for zero cost, rather than throwing billions of dollars at it. Second thing is that this whole concept of bailouts and so on. Let the General Motors fail. I mean, the General Motors that failed, you'd probably have had 200 new startups coming up, which would have created all the jobs. It's startups that create the jobs, not the old behemoths. So you need to have more entrepreneurship. The third thing is, I didn't cover my slides on entrepreneurship. You have to realize that the vast majority of entrepreneurs aren't young kids. They don't come from universities. They come from the workforce. So you have to start teaching entrepreneurship too. And what stops people from becoming entrepreneurs is, number one, fear of failure. Number two, a lack of knowledge on how to become an entrepreneur. Number three, seed financing. If you're unemployed, which 10% of the US population is, there's no going down from there. You already failed, right? So nothing to fear, right? So then you have to go to step two, which is to teach entrepreneurship. You basically have to now take our community colleges and turn them into trade schools, so that instead of offering unemployed, because we have these unemployment benefits that we keep debating, rather than giving free money to people just to be unemployed and be sad, you make them go to school to earn it. That you turn those unemployment benefits into scholarships, so that 3 months of trade school, you get a full stipend to go to trade school. I mean, that's the sort of thinking that you need here. Question?
I have a question about the data which you presented in the slide. So what is the methodology which you follow to collect all these data?
Each paper, I've published about 15 or so papers. If you go to my website, wadhwa.com, wadhwa.com, click on the research, you'll see many publications, and each one of those details the methodology behind it. Right.
You said India suffers from a weak education system, and I read a lot of articles on India, the Indian education system versus the US, and even though they're shorter in time, I read that they're a lot more practical than the theoretical education that you get in the US.
I don't believe the articles. Half of them are inspired by 2 million minutes. It's bogus. They watch that documentary and believe that's India. You're looking at 0.001% of India. The middle class who can send their children to elite schools. The vast majority of Indians get really horrible education. The public schools are awful. Teachers don't show up for class, and so on and so on. And even the IITs, which are supposed to be legendary, you go there and you try spending a day in them, you'll get bored out of your mind. It's all rote and memorization. IIT's advantage is its entrance exam. It basically selects the top, the cream of the cream of the cream of Indian youth, and it educates them. It's not the classes that they have. The curriculum is still in the 1970s. So.
Do you think there's some advantages to the ranking system as opposed to how we do it over here?
No. Because again, I didn't cover my entrepreneurship research. You'll find that most successful entrepreneurs don't come from elite colleges. It's not the school you went to that gives you the advantage. It's who you are and your motivation. Something like 80% of successful entrepreneurs came from colleges no one has ever heard of. Right? So there's no correlation between success as an entrepreneur and the school you went to.
Because as you talk right now in IITs and all those, the institutes, which are the premier institutes, they usually don't have those resource and R&D facilities in which students can work. And since
But you're describing life in India. It's a motivator to work harder and to rise above it because the system is so bad. You have to figure out, I mean, you have to learn how to work around. You have to ignore everything that you've been taught in class. You have to challenge authority. You have to, figure out how to use your own resources. You can't rely upon your university to teach you anything useful. Therefore, you have to learn it yourself.
yeah,
But that's the same thing with society. That you can't rely upon the government to do anything for you. Therefore, you have to do it yourself. That's Indians.
just in comparison to the US,
Right.
in US, like, university really focuses, like, they have all the facilities, they have all the resources.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reason because of the migrant students, they are in lesser.
That's why these foreigners come over here and give these people a kick in the butt. And Americans can't get admission to the schools because you have all these foreigners. The same debates that happen in California about Indians and Chinese now dominating all the schools because they trump in the entrance exams. But that's the way, that's America's biggest advantage. That all these debates about immigration, this is the way it's always been in America. You always had waves of immigrants coming here, challenging the people before them. And the people before them have hated the new immigrants. Before it was the Poles, the Hungarians, the Jews, then the Indians and the Chinese, and now the Mexicans, okay? That what happens is that you have these new immigrants that come in, they work extremely hard because they come from the societies that you talked about. So they're resourceful, they have to be creative. And that makes people before them work very hard. And they hate it because they take their jobs away. It's always been like that in America, but what has happened in America is because of this constant competition, the country has risen. This is why America is the only superpower in the world right now. It's the only great economy in the world. Despite the fact it's in trouble right now, this is why America keeps reinventing itself, because it has to think, it has to innovate, it has to face its competition. Therefore, it's a lot more open to change than any other country in the world.
Immigration is a very hot issue within America, and I guess politicians actually want to avoid that topic. And I'm not sure if you heard about the DREAM Act.
Yeah, I know.
So, what do you think about the DREAM Act?
I think it's a no-brainer. I mean, these kids are Americans. They didn't break the law when they came over here. I strongly support it.
So, in terms of, I guess your whole presentation, there's a way for, to actually make a presentation on the DREAM Act.
I've been focused on skilled immigration. All my research has been on engineering and science and so on. Now, that's also immigration, but it's a different aspect of it. I haven't stepped into that debate because the perplexing issue here is what do you do with the people who broke the law and jumped over the fence? Right. Okay, if you support them, then you're supporting criminals. You're supporting amnesty, and you can't win that debate. And frankly, I don't know what the answer is there. Okay, so and I haven't done any research on it, so I stay away from that debate.
No, of course, but I mean, some of your statistics actually overlap.
Yeah.
And
that's why I've kept my battles to focused on the skilled immigrants issue.
All right, thank you so much.
Sure.
All right, we have a great lineup of speakers for spring, and you'll see them on our website. You can see who's coming. And actually, one of them is Vivek, and he said he'll come again. So if you didn't have enough of him today, you can have.
I needed a third of my presentation, by the way. I have far more slides.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed all of you, and keep in touch. And please come again next semester for free. And we'll see you, and we'll get some lunch.
For free?
Yeah.
Right.